Every year, in the first week of March, something very predictable happens across offices in this country. Someone, usually from HR, sometimes a well meaning manager, sends a message on the group chat. It has a purple banner. It says something like, Happy Women's Day, you are an inspiration, keep shining. And then on Monday, the same person speaks over her in a meeting. And the women in that office read that message. Some of them smile, some of them roll their eyes, most of them, and this is the part I want to stay with, most of them say nothing. Not because they don't notice, but because they've learned that noticing out loud has a cost. I want to talk about Women's Day today. Not the version we have made it into, the version it actually was, and the very specific quiet work that happened somewhere between then and now that turned one of the most powerful political moments in women's history into a cake and a purple banner. Because I think the transformation tells us something important, not just about Women's Day, about how we handle women's anger, women's demands, and women's structural realities in India, and what happens when we celebrate something just enough to avoid having to change it. Here is the story most of us have absorbed about Women's Day. It is a day to celebrate women, to appreciate the women in your life, to post something meaningful on Instagram. Brands release campaigns, companies host panel discussions, schools do skits. Some offices give out small gifts. The framing is gratitude, appreciation, recognition, and on the surface, none of that seems wrong. Appreciation is good. Recognition is good. If we can set aside one day to say, I see you, I value you, what's the harm in that? The harm, I want to argue, is not in the celebration itself. The harm is in what the celebration replaced and what we are now able to avoid because the celebration exists. When you have Women's Day, you have technically acknowledged the issue. You have done the thing. You're on the right side. You can move forward now. The box is ticked. And so the harder questions, the ones that don't fit on a banner, don't have to be asked. Women's Day was born in 1908. 15,000 women marched through New York City demanding shorter working hours, better pay, and the right to vote. It was not a celebration, it was a confrontation. The Soviet Union made it an official holiday in 1917 because women textile workers had gone on strike, refusing to return to work, and their protest directly triggered a political revolution. The date was set to honor that strike. For decades, Women's Day was observed in communist and socialist countries as a day of political reckoning, a day to measure how far women's rights had actually moved, a day for protest, for demands, for more public accounting. The United Nations adopted it in 1977. And then, slowly over the decades that followed, something shifted. The political teeth was removed. The protest energy was softened. The day migrated from the streets into boardrooms, shopping malls, and group chats. In India, the transformation has been particularly complete. Women's Day here has become almost entirely about two things: brands and sentimentality. Campaigns about strong women, offers on women's products, appreciation posts, emotional videos, all of it carefully designed to make you feel something without asking you to do anything. And the feeling, when it arrives, is satisfying enough that most of us don't notice what's missing. What's missing is the question, what has actually changed? There was something deeply familiar about this pattern if you had grown up in India. This ability to absorb a demand by converting it into a tribute. Think about how we handle the mother who is exhausted. We don't address the exhaustion, we frame it. We call her sacrifice devotion. We call her silence grace. We turn her survival into a value system that and then hand it down to our daughters as aspiration. We do the same thing with Women's Day. The original demand was structural: shorter hours, better wages, political rights, equal standing. We looked at that demand and we said, you know what? Let's celebrate women instead. Because celebration is containable. Celebration doesn't require anyone to change anything. Celebration allows the existing structure to remain intact while everyone feels good about the gesture. And here is the thing about gestures, they are very effective at managing pressure. In a family, if someone is unhappy and you are attentive and warm on that one day, the pressure releases enough that the underlying problem doesn't have to be addressed. The same mechanism operates at the social level. Women's Day has become a pressure valve, not a reckoning, a release. I want to come closer to home now because I'm not really interested in the global history for its own sake. I am interested in what it produces, specifically in the lives of Indian women. Here is what I've observed. In urban India, educated women are increasingly aware that something is off. They can articulate gender disparity, they have read enough, discussed enough, they know the numbers, the wage gap, the unpaid labor statistics, the data on women dropping out of the workforce after marriage. And yet, in their own homes, in their own relationships, those same structures often remain untouched because they've been given language for a systemic problem and almost nothing for the personal one. It is much easier to talk about why women in India generally earn less than it is to have a conversation with your husband about why you are always one who tracks the school schedule, coordinates the cook, manages the in-laws visits, and still shows up for work the next morning. The systemic version of the problem is politically safe. It's about out there, them, the structure. The personal version of the problem is dangerous. It's about here, us, this house. Women's Day, as it has been shaped, keeps the conversation safely in the systemic lane. It never points at the dining table. And so Indian women are left in a very specific kind of loneliness. They are more articulate than any previous generation about the problem and more alone than ever in addressing it where it actually lives. Our mothers didn't have this particular loneliness. They didn't have the language. In some ways, not having the language was protection. You cannot grieve a gap you cannot name. Our generation has the language. We have the analysis. We have the panels and the podcast and the Instagram post. And we are sitting inside the same structures our mothers sat inside, except now we know in precise detail what those structures are doing to us. I think this is one of the most under-examined sources of distress among urban Indian women in their 30s and 40s. It is not ignorance that is painful, it is knowing clearly what is wrong and still not knowing how to change it in the place where your actual life happens. Women's Day, as it is currently designed, offers a very particular kind of comfort to this distress. It says, see, the world sees you, see, the conversation is happening, and the comfort is just real enough to reduce the urgency of the hard work. When you understand this, Women's Day stops being a celebration and starts being a diagnostic. What does this company's Women's Day even actually do? Does it result in policy change, flexible hours, equal pay reviews, promotions without the unspoken motherhood penalty, or does it result in a panel and lunch and a message from the CEO? What does your partner's Women's Day gesture actually mean? Is it the beginning of a real conversation about division of labor, emotional availability, the weight you carry alone, or is it flowers and dinner and then everything resumes as before? This is not cynicism, this is clarity. Clarity that allows you to ask different questions, better questions. Not was I appreciated today, but what in my actual life is structured around my own thriving, and where has appreciation been used very effectively as a substitute for that? That shift from appreciation to structure is where real change begins, and it begins not on March 8th, it begins in the conversations we are willing to have on the 364 days that the banner doesn't cover. I said at the beginning that most women, when they receive that group chat message, say nothing. I want to end with that silence. That silence is not compliance. It is often the accumulated wisdom of a woman who has learned that expressing what she actually thinks in that particular context will cost her something she cannot afford right now. That is not weakness. That is negotiation with a system that was not built for her. But I want to suggest something. The silence in the group chat is forgivable. The silence in the conversations that actually matter in marriages, in families, in the spaces where your actual life is decided, that silence is the one worth examining. Not to break it out loudly, but to ask, why is it there? What would it cost to speak? Is that cost real or is it inherited? And what has the silence over years and years of accumulating? What has it cost you instead? Women's Day, at its origin, was a refusal to be silenced where it mattered. That is worth recovering. The question of where women's lives are actually structured, what we are taught to accept, what we are taught to ask for, and what we are never taught to name at all is something I've written about in Dear Sister, Dear Brother, Letters of Freedom, not as analysis, as conversation about what changes when the people closest to us, brothers, fathers, partners, the men we grew up with, begin to ask different questions too. Because structural change doesn't only happen in offices, it happens at kitchen tables, and that conversation has to start somewhere. If this episode gave you something to sit with, dear sister, dear brother, Letters of Freedom is where I continue it. The details are in the show notes.